And we're back. This is the Colombia Calling podcast. I'm Richard Mccoll, your host here in Bogota, Colombia, 2,600 meters closer to the stars. Our very special guest, I think the first guest we've ever had in Paraguay, in Asunción. His name is Laurence Blair. He's a journalist and author. Very exciting. He's just got a book come out called Patria, Lost Countries of South America, and that's what we're going to talk about. I'm at 2,600 meters. He's at what, 10 meters, something like that?
Welcome. Yeah. I think I'm on the 14th floor, so probably about 100 meters or so. But yeah, street level is we're about 100 meters or so from the river here. So yeah, pretty low, pretty flat here in Paraguay.
An absolute pleasure to have you here on the podcast. It's sunny today, but it'll be raining in the afternoon. What kind of temperature are we looking at in Asunción today?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Richard. Really great to be on the show. Long time listener, first time caller, I think they say. Today it's bright and sunny. I think we're in mid-20s and probably going to climb to mid-30s by the end of the day. Paraguay is hot, hot and humid. We've had a lovely spring where it's been 20s most days. Kind of semi-tropical climate, but yeah, we're about to go into the inferno of summer, so I'm kind of enjoying being able to not have the AC on for a little while and be able to go to the gym during the day, because my gym hasn't got AC. We've just got these industrial fans, and it's like a kind of like industrial hangar, so it just heats up like I don't know what during the day, so you can get a heat stroke if you're not careful. But no, it's nice here. It's lovely weather. Yeah.
Well, it's such an exciting place because it's such a bizarre place. And I say this with all utter respect and affection. I've got friends in Peru and so on who I studied with back in London back in the day. And they said, well, Richard, the only reason Paraguay exists to us is because you've been there. And that's kind of the feeling that one gets. And, obviously it's no disrespect to Paraguay, this landlocked country, there in between Bolivia, Brazil, not quite bordering Uruguay, but with the border with Argentina and stuff. It's just sort of in there. And every now and then news pops up, an election, obviously, something like that, an election, or usually some sort of hydroponic sort of cultivations of marijuana or cannabis near the border with Brazil. And I've always come back to the best book, in my opinion, on Paraguay being, the John Gimlet book, At the Tomb of the Inflatable Pig, which it's dated, but things have changed, and yet I know they haven't. I know that Paraguay still resembles, again, this exotic, bizarre place in South America. And I think let's just start with it. What took you to Paraguay?
Well, I agree with you, Richard, and I think a lot of Paraguayans also wouldn't be offended by that. A writer friend of mine called Norma Flores Allende, she's from here, and she recently wrote, saying that Paraguay is the most kind of delirious of Latin American realities. There's material here that could supply dozens of Pulitzers, hundreds of Hollywood movies. Things happen here which are just, I think it's almost the kind of Macondo comparison is actually, I think Macondo can be found in this small town here in Paraguay, not necessarily in Colombia. That's that feeling of being trapped in time, which is something another friend of mine here, Christian, recently said. We almost are trapped in time a little bit here in Paraguay. For so much of its history, it was isolated from its neighbors. It has the Chaco forest on one side, the huge Atlantic forest on the other, not much of which exists sadly anymore, but it took you weeks to voyage upriver. So I think there's always been that sense, hasn't there, of Paraguay, this kind of, and to quote another Paraguayan writer, Augusto Roa Bastos, an island surrounded by land. This kind of Caribbean island, which just happens to be in the middle of South America. So I think like many people, I was kind of intrigued by that. The Graham Greene, Travels with My Aunt kind of thing. And actually, there's some of your listeners, I'm sure, will have heard of the Paraguayan War, the Triple Alliance War, which was fought in the 1860s when about maybe half or over of the Paraguayan population as a whole was wiped out by this joint invasion of Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. And the British explorer Richard Francis Burton, who had a habit of kind of rocking up in places where he wasn't necessarily always welcome, he turned up towards the end of the conflict, and he kind of, interviewed sort of prisoners of war. And when he came home, there's a really interesting anecdote which he tells at the start of his book. He kind of stepped ashore in Southampton, and I think he was expecting people to be really curious and say, this is the, he says it's the most remarkable campaign fought during the present century. But he says that, the country has dropped clean out of vision. Many indeed were uncertain whether it formed part of North or South America. And he finds, quote, blankness of face whenever Paraguay is mentioned, and a general confession of utter ignorance and hopeless lack of interest. And I can relate to that. It's like people, even my family back home will, or cousins or aunties and uncles will be like, oh yes, you're in Uruguay, right? You're that. And I'm like, no. That's kind of the opposite. That they're like secular, liberal, World Cup winners, Atlantic shoreline. It's almost the opposite. But I think there are so many links between Paraguay and the world. Like this Paraguay migration is all over the world. Paraguay's food goes all over the world. It's drugs, it's marijuana. We're a major cocaine corridor to Europe. So, I think to respond to your question, I started off, I think like many people, many gringos, expats do in Latin America, just doing backpacking thing. I was fascinated by South America. I've been exposed to the Che Guevara Motorcycle Diaries film at a tender young age. I think I would have been about 13 or 14 when that came out, and just kind of was just fascinated by this part of the world, which I think growing up in the UK, you don't get exposed to that much, like we in as much as we do like study global history, it tends to be the parts of the world that Brits like formerly colonized, right? Your Africas and your Asias and Middle East. So I was just fascinated by it. And I found myself in Chile. I was in Santiago. I was working for a paper called Santiago Times. Rest in peace. I know you're also a past collaborator, Richard, and had a great time and learned a lot, but it was a very brief experience because I literally arrived having, blown through my savings on this little backpacking trip. And they said to me, we're actually shutting down in a few weeks because we've managed to annoy one of our main funders, who I think was the Kuwaiti embassy at that point, or Qatari embassy, and they'd done something or other to annoy them. So I was like, okay, well, I've got to think fast here. And I didn't really have any contacts in the media. I'm not from a family of journalists. We're not from London. I grew up in Dorset in southwest England, very like rural part of the world. So it was kind of just, what trying to pitch editors, and I think we all know this experience. If you've ever been a freelancer, you send the pitch that you've got crafted perfectly to some like anonymous inbox, like it's info@theguardian.com or something. And of course, no one's ever going to read that, and they don't know who you are. And if they do get back to you, they'll be like, well, thanks very much, but we already have our Santiago correspondent, or our Buenos Aires correspondent, or our Rio correspondent. Like, why should we take anything from you? So that was what motivated me to think, well, let's think outside the box a little bit. Where can I go where there's going to be really interesting, cool, fascinating, sad, funny stories? B, where is there not? Am I not going to have to like be elbowing people aside to try and get tell them? And got on the bus over to Buenos Aires. Was there for a couple of weeks. Got the overnight bus up to Asunción. It's about 16 hours. Got here at 6 a.m. one morning. It was February. It was swelteringly hot. Sweat was dripping off me. I was staying in some little hut in someone's back garden to save money. But things went well. I jumped on some stories to do with drug trafficking, the tiny guerrilla group called the EPP, the Paraguayan People's Army. The Pope visited that year, which was a major event, and he publicly met with a with an LGBT group, which was quite historic, a very like Catholic, very conservative country. So things went well, and that was about 10 years ago now, and I was back and forth between here and the UK for a while. I would use Asuncion as a base to be able to go and report from Bolivia, or nip across to Chile, or go down to Argentina. But I do kind of feel a little bit in the center of the action here, like I know we're a little bit away from like the big churning economy of Brazil or the China question in Peru, but I sort of feel like actually in a small way you can kind of almost tell tell a part of the Latin American story through Paraguay. Like I feel there's a lot of things in microcosm here which help you shed light on this part of the world.
Well, it is. I mean, it truly is, and I understand fully and I usually call it is not entering a shit fight with other journalists, which of course I entered straight away. Was it 19 years ago in Colombia? But there's been a big shift and change in who's there and what I do as well. But it was very much a thought process. Where can I go and make my own little corner? And after time, it happens. But Paraguay, of course, you are the man in Paraguay. How's your Guarani then? Because of course, that being the other language.
Más o menos. I can get by with a couple of basic phrases. It's a work in progress. Like what I do speak is to a greater or lesser extent is Chopara, which is kind of like the mix of Spanish and Guarani, which most people kind of use here. Like it's mainly like mixed Spanish mixed in with like swear words, like de la core, no puedo creer que eso pasó, or ay jue. It's really good for like interjections and exclamations and curse words and stuff like that. But no, I was doing some, because I found myself in the UK during the pandemic, and I was doing some Guarani classes over Zoom, and and it's difficult because it's got nothing in common with They say actually if you speak English, you should be able to speak. It's a bit easier to learn Guarani. Apparently, there's some similarities in the tense or case structure. That hasn't been my experience. But no, it's a work in progress. Put it that way. But it does unlock, even just speaking a little bit, like a couple of phrases as I do, and like be able to just be like "baiteko, baitepa," like stuff like that. It's quite remarkable how that will change your interviewees or whoever you're speaking to. It will change their demeanor entirely, because Spanish is. I mean, I'm sure your listeners will know this, but just to give them the backdrop, Paraguay is the only country I think in Latin America where a language with indigenous roots, indigenous language. Paraguayan Guarani is kind of descended from the Guarani spoken by Guarani communities, and actually Paraguayans who are fluent in Paraguayan Guarani might not always be able to make themselves understood if they go to a present day indigenous Guarani community. It's a bit complicated, but it's the only country where that language is kind of spoken by a majority of the population. Like the stats are difficult, but I think roughly 2/3 of people speak Guarani, 2/3 of households speak Guarani to a greater or lesser extent at home. And so when you're interviewing someone in Spanish, so they're two official languages, Guarani and Spanish. When you interview someone and you're talking to someone in Spanish, often it'll be quite formal. It's the language of business or politics or the law, and they can be maybe a little bit sort of reserved. But as soon as you kind of drop in a little joke or a little something around in Guarani, it's kind of they'll crack up or they'll smile and they'll be like, "Oh, hang on, you got a bit of Guarani? Wow, wow, and it's a really nice way to establish confidence and just break down that little kind of barrier, I guess. So yeah, it's definitely something I want to keep working on. Now I've got a bit more time now the book is finished.
Well, I think it's phenomenal because for you to be able to bring up even just a couple of phrases, as I say, they just must, even 10 years on or whatever, or 12 years on, the longer you've been there, it must be, they must still go, wow, a Brit learning Guarani, able to say some words and so on. I mean, yeah, I can understand how that would just open doors and make
definitely. Yeah, but I think people here are really, I think there's this really I think Paraguay, because of its history, because of its isolation, I think people like are really sensitive to how they're seen by outsiders, and really, they really respond, I think, very warmly to, foreigners who come here. Like, I mean, a bunch of influencers, gringo influencers, backpackers, digital nomads have like come here and very quickly created these massive followings, literally just by, I'm sure you've seen it in Colombia as well, right? Maybe it's a kind of Latin American thing, but I think it's very, very strong here. And like just a picture of yourself on a mountain with a Paraguayan flag being like, Roy Haihu Paraguay, which is I love Paraguay, instantly viral. That stuff's going to get a million likes. If you're a British dip, Her Majesty's current man here in Asuncion has really, again, made himself this kind of viral superstar. He does it in a very intelligent way, but like literally, like he'll film himself going to the market and trying a local vori, or he'll film himself at the match last night, being like, "Yeah, vamos a abrir roja," and that stuff just explodes because people are so, I think, really, really grateful to see that people are seeing the positive things and the beautiful and interesting and funny things about their country, because obviously it's got a lot of bad press over the years, often for good reasons. Your Nazi drug lords, your corruption scandals. So, I mean, an example of this, just a few weeks ago, I published a story with the New York Times about this beloved Paraguayan company called Mccoll, spelled Mickey, and it's something that I'd seen in the shops. This brand of like spices, and they sell yerba mate and cooking or baking ingredients and I was like, hey, that's Mickey Mouse. They've got Mickey Mouse on the packaging. I guess I just assumed that there must be some like franchising deal with Walt Disney, right? Like, because you wouldn't just go and use Mickey. But as I dug into it, and spoke to friends and colleagues, they're like, no, that's Mickey. It's separate from Disney. And not only that, they've actually beat Disney in this lawsuit, this massive lawsuit in the 90s. And so me and my photojournalist colleague, Maria Magda Arellana, we kind of dug into it and went to interview the company, and we spoke to influencers who use their products and shoppers. And they have this big mouse mascot that comes out at Christmas and hands out sweets on like that main avenue, and comes out on Children's Day as well, and hands out sweeties and popcorn, and people go crazy for him. It's Mickey. It's a rock star. Like, that's the phrase that one of my interviewees used. She was like, it's a religion. He's a rock star. Like, because there was nothing in the 80s, 90s when this company kind of got going. It was founded, and here's the secret behind it. They were founded way back in the 1930s by the son of Italian immigrants. Created this ice cream shop, and he basically registered the trademark to Mickey the mouse before Disney had registered it in Paraguay. And they went all the way to the Supreme Court in the 90s, and the court, was like, yeah, fair play. Like, you guys were there first. And so I wrote up this story, and obviously it's one of those stories that's interesting to like gringos and foreigners and Yankees, right? Because that's like, oh, that's Mickey Mouse, right? What's it doing in Paraguay? But what I wanted to do was not just tell this story about this weird legal case, but also like, what does this show us about Paraguayan gastronomy, Paraguayan history, Paraguayan sense of itself as this country, this little underdog country that's been up against the world, has been invaded by all its neighbors, and has, really, really often been on the brink of extinction, so many times, and yet has somehow found a way to flip the script and find a way to keep going. And we published this story, and I went to this celebration where Mickey was handing out sweeties, and spoke to this a couple of working class mums who brought their kids, and one of them said, I was like, so have you heard about the lawsuit, right? You heard, she's like, yeah. I was like, so what does that make you? What does that make you kind of feel like? What do you think about it? She's like, oh, she was like, it's nice, at least we won at something. so it was just, I think just a really fun story, and we published it, and it went kind of viral here, and lots of people, friends of friends, contacts, colleagues reached out and said, thank you for like telling that story and kind of highlighting like something positive and interesting and fun and almost like the ingenuity of Paraguay. And so that was really fun. And it made the front page of the Times, which, as you know, if you're a freelancer, like reporting from Paraguay, like that's pretty cool. So that's kind of the fascination for me, I guess. Like I who knows? Maybe one day I want to be in Brasilia or Sao Paulo or Mexico City and doing some big things. But I really like getting off the beaten track a little bit, physically and figuratively. These kind of stories really. Maybe it's because I come from a small part of the UK that no one's really heard of, and I also maybe have a bit of an underdog complex as well. I'm identified perhaps a little bit with Paraguay. But yeah, no, people get crazy for that influencer. Foreigner likes Paraguay could be like the headline of so many stories here.
So that could be your autobiography when you're writing it up. It's like I've got a couple that I think of myself as way back in the day. I was on the social pages at the Daily Telegraph. One of the worst. I've had very few like full-time jobs, and I do very badly at them as well. I was referred to as the unimpressed boy. That might be one of my titles, and the other one was the non-conventional adrenaline junkie. So I'm working these out. So,
that's nice.
But really, really cool. You have to name the town you're from in Dorset, just so I can get it in my head.
I'm from Weymouth. I don't know if that rings any bells. Famous for its prisons. It's got a nice golden long sandy beach. King George III went there to cure his madness. Don't think it worked. There's a journalist and writers who come. Well, Thomas Hardy is a local boy, right? He was from Dorchester, and obviously we all read him. Big Hardy fan. But there's a New Yorker correspondent. I think she was in the US for a long time, who's also from Weymouth, and she's on record as saying, "I hate it. I couldn't wait to get out of there." I've got mixed feelings. Like I really love Dorset. I think it's really beautiful, and I think that the people are very special, and like, yeah, my sister's still there. She runs her tattoo shop. She's got a really successful business there. She's got her kids. So I go back whenever I can. But it's difficult to be a foreign correspondent or indeed a full-time freelancer. In Weymouth or indeed Dorset as a whole. So although actually John Lee Anderson lives down the road. He lives. I hope you won't mind me doxing him. I think this is public record. So he lives in West. I'll tell the general area. He lives in West Dorset, so not too far away from me. So there is actually a small Dorset Latin American caucus, I guess you could call it. And in some ways it's similar. I was thinking about this, like, actually there are some similarities, like to leave Dorset. I know this is probably going to be of limited interest to your listeners, but I'm going to say it anyway. To leave Dorset, you have to drive for like an hour to get around the estate of Richard Drax MP. I think he's now just lost his seat, but he's one of this family of like, he's descended from 17th century slavers, and his ancestors were the MP. And it's almost this like feudalistic hacienda situation, and you have these ancient ruins of hill forts up on the ridges. There's almost quite an Andean reality, I think, in Dorset. The campesinos struggling. You got your terratenientes, no guerrilla groups yet, although we'll see how we go under Starmer the next couple of years. So I think that maybe you could draw a kind of tenuous connection.
I have to jump in here. The only ever time that Dorset has been likened to anything Andean. During the pandemic, I did genealogy, and a lot of my maternal side comes from northern Dorset. But they must have been farm workers on the Drax estate because they were, impoverished. But I was thinking about this. Weymouth. I do know because I know that Steve Claridge managed the football team, and my friend did that documentary, and it was John Terry's brother, Paul Terry, who was like the star. So there
Absolutely.
you go.
Yeah.
So
When
I
the
do know.
terrors.
But anyway, that's another story. You did a nice way of doing a segue there. Just John Lee Anderson being a neighbour, pretty much. John Lee Anderson wrote a very nice blurb about your book. Perhaps you'd like to share it.
Oh well, yeah. No, I was really blown away by that. I mean, I've interacted with John Lee once or twice over the years. We never met in person. That's often is the way in this business. But I reached out to him and he gave me an amazing. Do you know what? I just happen to have a copy right in front of me, which I'm going to put on the camera. So this is it. This is Patria, Lost Countries of South America, and we have an amazing quote. Yeah, lovely quote from John Lee. He says, "This book is a gem." An exuberant history written with scholarly verve and literary dexterity, an unputdownable delight from start to finish. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that, really. So really grateful to John Lee for that. I mean, yeah. So this has been. I'll give you the Potters story. I mean, this has been about 7-8 years in the works, amongst my reporting 9 to 5 really. And it's kind of a journey through South American history, an alternative history. There are so many dominant narratives and stereotypes that always get trotted out about South America and Latin America as a whole. And I think one really dominant one is that kind of guns, germs, and steel thing, right? You would have heard of this, the Jared Diamond book, which I think has a lot of positives to it. But there's kind of, I think maybe an idea which Diamond himself doesn't even put forward, but I think has maybe taken hold. On the one hand, you have this idea that or perhaps on the left, that Latin America's story is one of constant exploitation and colonialism and oppression, and all indigenous resistance has kind of been crushed, and I think also on the related idea on the right or conservative sectors is that yes, Europeans brought civilization to this empty wilderness. There was no one there. There was nothing, and I think I just wanted to kind of just break past those a little bit and say, can we tell the story of South America through 9, 10 or so vanished kingdoms, pre-Columbian realms, Patagonian powers, Brazilian slave republics, examples not only before the conquistadors arrived, but long after, where indigenous peoples, native peoples, Afro-descendants, mixed race people, the popular classes, for want of a better word, kind of resisted and fought back, and created these alternative spaces, these of freedom, of autonomy. I talk about the Vilcabamba, which was this kind of remnants of the Inca Empire, which held out for a generation after Pizarro and gang arrived, and they kind of negotiated with the King of Spain. They fought off invasions. Same thing as Palmares. A lot of your listeners in Colombia will be familiar with Palenque, right? The town near Cartagena, which was founded by people who escaped slavery and kind of signed a treaty with the Spanish authorities. Palmares is a much bigger example of that. It lasted for just over a century. We're talking about a population of 20,000 people, like holding out in the forest, gunpowder, advanced weaponry. It's almost like telling the story of Latin America through these different entities, going right through to the present day. I talk about how Bolivia, this is a favorite theme of mine. Bolivia, despite being landlocked, still has a navy, and it's a kind of government policy, a policy of state, that Bolivia will not be complete until they can recover their lost coastal province, which they lost to Chile in this war 140 years ago. So the navy are there. They're in there. They've got an ocean-going simulator, which I visited in Cochabamba, where they can kind of play on the ship's wheel and have the weather effects, and they can practice sailing in Cape Horn or the River Thames. To Paraguay's idea of itself as this country again, which has almost never been the same since this fledgling Paraguayan superpower was crushed in the 1870s by the Triple Alliance War. And there's a brief cameo towards the end for the Republiqueta de Marquetalia, which, you're familiar with, Richard, that's the kind of genesis of the FARC, right? This fear that from the Colombian government of the time in the 60s, and also their US military and intelligence advisors, that Manuel Marulanda and co were founding this breakaway socialist republic in the mountains of Tolima, and they had to kind of crush them to stop that from happening. So again, this kind of idea that I think throughout Latin American history, these utopian ideas of revived Inca monarchy or a pan-South American united superpower, the idea of the Patria Grande, which is obviously where that's one influence for the title right here. But the idea of Patria, even in Chile, I trace the history of how the Mapuche held the Spanish at bay for forever, really. Like the people talk about the conquest of Chile, the conquest of South America. It was never completed. The Europeans failed to conquer the Americas, or South America in particular. It was a job that was half finished at best. If you look at the actual where their control actually reached to, they didn't extend much beyond the major cities. The Amazon, the Pampas, Patagonia, the Chaco, all these places were still being ruled not just by what we would call disorganized tribes, but flourishing, powerful, independent kingdoms which negotiated, traded, fought, and really managed to keep their independence alive. And I trace the story of what people today call Mapu, this Mapuche kingdom, which spanned both sides of the Andes, from sea to shining sea, if you will. It was intact until about 1870, 1880, when Chile and Argentina then effectively invaded, colonized, and especially on the Argentine side, genocided, for want of a better verb, the indigenous people there, But even today, there's a very lively, very strong Mapuche independence movement, autonomy movement, and there are these armed groups in southern Chile in particular who've been waging this quite violent campaign of resistance. There's been a state of emergency there for about 3 years now. And you see these videos on YouTube. There are these guys who are tooled up. They've got the Uzis, shotguns, submachine guns. They're in the undergrowth. They're saying, we want to restore the Mapuche kingdom. That's what we're about. And so these countries, which, say they're the lost countries, but they're alive issues. They're not dead and gone. I think they have a real huge relevance to today. I mean, just to give you a final example, I trace the story of ancient Amazonia as well in the book. We think of, don't we, of the Amazon as being this empty, virgin, pristine wilderness, of a couple of uncontacted peoples. The reality is that story is being flipped on its head. Like, we've got new technologies, we've got new approaches. We're working more and more with indigenous communities in the Amazon to retrace their own history. And what we're finding is that there were actually these vast cityscapes in the pre-Columbian Amazon, going back some 4,000 or 5,000 years, or 3,000 years even, temporary with the height of classical Rome. That they had roads, pyramids, temples, houses, highways. And most intriguingly, they actually seem to have molded the rainforest around them. They planted useful trees. They domesticated dozens of kinds of different useful plants. So and that I think is really relevant to present day, right? Because it shows us that societies can live in their millions with and within the rainforest without destroying it. So I'm always reluctant to be one of these people who's like, history teaches us so much. There are direct lessons, but I think there is lots that we can learn, and so really just this is just a kind of perhaps a greatest hits, of some of them, for me, the most interesting bits of South American history, and I'm trained as a historian, right? I've got my undergrad degree in history, and I've there's about 80 pages of notes there at the back for people who want to see, okay, which archive has he got that from? What archaeological record is he consulting there? What book is he working with there? But it's written in a way that you don't have to be a nerd or a history buff to enjoy it. It's try to write it in a fast-paced, novelistic way. So you're kind of on the journey with me. You've got your backpack on, you've got your machete, you're coming down the Amazon River, and you're meeting these people. That's the key thing. It's not it's not me. It's not just me, right? We're hearing from the people who live in these places, right? Like, what do they think about it? What do they know about it? And so, yeah, big undertaking, complicated undertaking. Who knows how it's going to be received, but so far we've had a really nice response. We had some really lovely reviews. Had a really nice review in the Telegraph, which was nice, which I wasn't expecting. Like they may be perhaps not the natural home for something that's like in some ways implicitly anti-colonial or decolonial history. But they said, this, in other hands, this would be seen really woke or worthy, but it's actually told in such an engaging way and vivid kind of way that it really kind of hangs together. So we're grateful for that, and I'm just really excited to be able to like share some of my passion, enthusiasm. I don't describe myself as an expert or an academic, but someone who's passionate about the history and really just hope that it will contribute to that conversation where we can just kind of maybe switch. We in the Anglo-speaking world can just switch on a bit more to Latin America, because I think let's just close with this, like on the one example of how invisible I think Latin Americans are, or Latin America is to Britons, is how in the UK, if you're of Latin American descent, of whom there are about 250, 300,000 people at the moment, you can't identify as that on the census or official forms. You have to tick the box marked other. And I think that kind of speaks volumes a little bit about how we have this amnesia maybe in the Anglo-speaking world about Latin America, despite its massive importance to the world.
It is truly fascinating. And what you've come across in that last intervention there is that obviously, for the UK, Latin America is very secondary, not even secondary, because of course it's not the old empire. We do have the mentions of the British Legion and with Bolivar and so on and so forth, but who knows about the sort of British attacks on Buenos Aires back in the day, and who knows about these other stories. And I like the stories, and I'm pursuing stuff here in Colombia, but about individuals who came out obviously with their steam trunks, and opened up gold mines and nobody knows about, and the son of Stevenson of the railways, who started mines in Tolima, near where you were, in Marquetalia. And these things, for me, these forgotten histories that are erased in most of Latin America by the contemporary issues, the drug smuggling, the guerrilla wars, and obviously the corruption. They erase these things. And so you said it, but your book is a deconstructing of the sort of the conquest myth. It's a retelling, but through the eyes of others. And I wanted to sort of make reference to other books that really do back up what you said about the Amazon. It's the lost city of the monkey god in Honduras. Obviously, Honduras is not a massive place, and yet they're still finding, and in Guatemala and in Mexico, they're still finding settlements. And then if you look at the lost city of Zed in the Amazon, of course there were settlements. These are not abandoned areas just because we're reading the book, a great book, Fordlandia, about the rubber barons in the interior of the Amazon near to Santarém. Things existed beforehand. Things existed, not just because of the way that we have interpreted it in, let's say, the Northern Hemisphere, or North American, Northern European Hemisphere. And the other thing that you are really alluding to, that I like getting across a great deal, is that there's not a great number of us, let's say, full-time in the area, full-time reporting, doing sort of more curious stories, or like yourself writing the book. And there is a big reason for it, because it doesn't sell as much. If you really wanted to make your name and get out there, well, go straight to Ukraine right now, or go straight to Israel or the West Bank or something right now. But previous, when I was cutting my teeth, you would be in Iraq, or even prior to that, in Bosnia or somewhere. But those of us who are here long term become real specialists, but with a it's deeper than an affection. It's a true love for it. And you just talking as you are now, it shows that there's an understanding to get beyond what is always put out there. I can't stand, for example, and I've been guilty of it, because when you're a journalist, you have to sell a piece, and the editor goes, "Oh, we have to have Escobar and cocaine in the first paragraph."
And his cocaine hippos.
Yeah. Oh, don't do the hippos.
That really winds you guys up, doesn't it?
It really winds us up. It's just like, because every young journalist comes in thinking they broke the story. Every young journalist. And he's like, and forgive me for all my animalist friends, just kill the hippos. I'm sorry, just cull them. They're an invasive species. But it does really wind us. And you watch the next 20-something-year-old come over and write the next hippo story, and it's as if the US, the UK, anywhere else forgot about it in the last 3 years. And of course, it is an incredibly visual story, because it brings in everything. Yeah. And I understand all of that.
We have a Paraguayan version of that, which is there's a big, massive landfill, a trash, what do we call it in US English, a rubbish dump, basically, right on the far side of the city, called Cateura. And there's an orchestra. There's a guy who has created an orchestra for kids using recycled instruments. So like trash, they've turned into violins or whatever. And they've done world tours, and every year someone will come and do a story about it, from trash to treasure. Isn't this lovely? And I don't want to be too down on the organization or the NGO. Like, I'm sure there's been some good in it, but other people have said to me, well, hang on a minute, like these kids are never going to be able to progress to professional level, because I'm no matter how well you've recycled your tin can to create a cello, it's never going to be concert standards. So like, are you not just being trapped into this almost like kind of performing circus animal kind of situation? But yeah, every year someone comes into this story, and I'm just like, oh, there's so many other cool things that you could do, and I always try and be really, I try and avoid being territorial about, quote unquote, my patch, because I think I've seen that can really just turn people quite bitter, I think, if you go that way. And I love meeting other colleagues, and whenever someone's in town, I'll always be up for grabbing a coffee and sharing some tips or contacts, because I think the more of us that are doing good, responsible, interesting, ethical work, like, the better. I don't think there's we're not fighting for limited scraps. I think we can make the pie bigger, right? But I do know what you mean. Like, it's just like, oh, not that one again. Why haven't they done anything about the hippos? Why haven't they? Like you say, they should have by now. They should have done something.
But I mean, that's my point really on it. But for example, for me, for Paraguay, I want to know about the Australian socialists, if they still exist out there. Apparently, I talked to a Paraguayan within the last couple of years who said there are a few of the descendants still out there. But that, for me, is a fascinating story, which it has links to Nietzsche. This is interesting.
Absolutely. No, that was actually one of the first stories I did hear for the Guardian. Very short little piece, but I went out there. It's a place called Nueva Londres, or New London. And it's in the middle of central Paraguay. It's big rolling kind of savanna, basically. They're on a little rise, a tiny little town, 3-horse town, and everyone's surname is either Smith or Kennedy, and they descend from this. There's a bunch of Australian socialists. A guy called William Lane, I think he was from Bristol, but had emigrated to Australia, and the idea was to create this socialist teetotal paradise. It didn't go so well. And they kind of split up within a couple of years, but they're still around, actually. I've got a couple of friends who descended from them. But obviously today are Paraguayan as mandioca, right? as they say here. They're there. And I think that was quite an example of quite a successful integration. Like, while the project itself didn't last long, and they were being eaten alive by insects, and there were fights, and they stuck around, like the descendants are still here. In many cases, like with the Nueva Alemania thing or Nuevo Bordeaux, which is now Villa Ayes, just over the river, they kind of fell apart almost instantly, and people actually went home because they couldn't make it work. There's this really notorious case where after the war, Paraguay's broke. It needs people. It needs migration, right, to kind of restock the population. And obviously, the ideas of the time are like, yeah, let's get Europeans, let's get Britons because they're racially superior or whatever, and they say, right, we're gonna pay millions to this British banks, and they're gonna bring over a bunch of Lincolnshire farmers who are gonna be these industrious, sharecroppers, and they're gonna till the land. And the agents of this loan, of this project, basically go around the docks in London and just scour any kind of homeless people, beggars, tinkers, tailors, prostitutes, you name it, shove them on the ships. And of course they come here, and of course they're not farmers, and it really falls to bits. A little recommendation for your listeners: I really recommend checking out the Tony Bourdain Parts Unknown episode on Paraguay. I think he gets under the skin quite well. And he actually traces the history of an ancestor of his who came out to Paraguay, supposedly bringing fireworks and hats. But he suspects, and I think maybe they do a little bit of editorial sleight of hand with it, but he suspects that his ancestor was a gun runner, was bringing explosives into the country before the war broke out with Brazil. But yeah, there's so many kind of, you mentioned the case of Nueva Alemania, which is, it's Elizabeth Nietzsche, the sister of the philosopher, obviously, and her husband Bernhard Forster, who was a kind of, I guess, like a proto-Nazi, right? Like one of these early guys, with these theories about Aryan racial superiority. And again, they rocked up here and found that maybe they weren't so racially superior after all, because they couldn't make it work. And he and his wife ended up, I think, they poisoned themselves in the Hotel del Lago, which is the big fancy German hotel near San Bernardino. So there's so many of these stories. There's some of them are perhaps a bit more sympathetic, these utopian experiments, these dreams. Others are nakedly imperialistic or colonial. But I think this really deeply rooted idea, which goes right back to the 1530s, 40s. Paraguay is this kind of land of fertile soil, of kind of barefoot, demure women, of this agreeable climate. You read this literature from early 1900s, kind of post-war, and there's this book called Picturesque Paraguay, where this British guy is trying to encourage people to come and settle. It's like, if you want, you can just hang your hammock and suck oranges all day until the crack of doom. It's brilliant, and there are no suffragettes. There's none of this. There's none of that, and that idea is so strong. And I think I try and resist it in my work and in my life. I'm not that interested in that thing on a personal level, but on an intellectual level, I think it's really interesting. And I see today there are so many, especially post and even during pandemic, has to be said, so many foreigners, Germans, Yankees, Brits have come out to Paraguay. I think in pursuit of that vision. There's this idea that this is a kind of, almost like if you've got money, you can do what you want. There are no laws. You don't have to get vaccinated. You can do this. You can do that. There's no taxes. I mean, taxes are really low. It's 10% on personal income. And yeah, there were a lot of people who did turn up without vaccinations. There's one German family that actually they'd sold everything. There's about 12 people, like two mums and dads and their kids. They turned up at the airport in mid-pandemic. And they were turned away because they hadn't had vaccinations, but they brought all their family with them. Clearly, they thought that, oh no, we can just get in. So I see a lot of that right now. There's a big expat boom. Obviously, nowhere near as big as Medellin or whatever, but I see a lot of that happening now, and a lot of them are Bitcoin miners because Paraguay has, at least for now, it has a huge amount of spare hydroelectric energy because it has the massive Itaipu Dam and the smaller one called Yacyretá, which is mainly exported to Brazil because Paraguay hasn't got the industry to use it. So there are a lot of Bitcoin bros that are kind of turning up and saying, oh, great, we can, just mine this stuff for free, basically. So you see the same dynamics that, as a student of history, Richard, like you see the same dynamics, I think, across the centuries, like this idea of foreigners about being able to go somewhere and take what they want. And And to an extent, I think as a journalist, although I do live here, like I think you're not exempt from that. I'm also interested in finding stories and selling them abroad. I'm trying to do more work that's published locally and do more collaborations with colleagues. But I think yeah, the trope of the faraway paradise is really strong. It's something that you have to reckon with.
I'm absolutely certain that, I fall into these categories as well. But I like when you think about the beginning of time in these books and the chances who would sell the idea, and how that is the kind of the chances, the evolution today, the Bitcoin miners, as like you say, in Medellin. But these are also the guys, and so many of them, you see them on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, but you see them there talking about how cheap it is. Things, I can live for $2,000 and have a penthouse and Bitcoin mine and wear shorts every day and look at the women. And I guess these are the evolution of the chances from back in the day, perhaps. And but this, you can sit in a hammock and suck oranges all day is a great description. But I think we should, you are definitely plunging into some of the more philosophical thought processes that are it's not a random stream of consciousness in your book, because it is very well thought out, like a historian, but written like a journalist. And that's what makes it so accessible. And for anyone, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I think it could go on for hours. I could just listen to you for hours talking about all these things. Go on to Substack, because Laurie has the Paraguay Post. And if you are a journalist looking at writing some stuff, I guess, about Paraguay, go to that. Also, I wish you the best, and I don't think you need my wishes, but the best. I think you're going to be very successful with this. It already is very successful. Patria, Lost Countries of South America by Laurence Blair. Amazing. And you holding up that hardbound copy is just incredible. Look how
there
big
it
is.
Yeah.
Look how big it is.
The doorstop. Nothing else.
And I will definitely go through all the indices, because I'm that kind of morbid geek. But
someone will. I'm glad someone will.
Well done, and congratulations. I expect you'll be talking at the Royal Geographic Society before long and doing a book tour. But what great work! I've got the draft in my inbox. I'm going to read it slowly and carefully. I've only skimmed it for today, but I love it. I already love it, and I can recommend people out there, please support us, support writers, support Laurence, support the boy from Weymouth in Asuncion.
Who'd have thought it? Yeah, absolutely. No, well, I really appreciate that, Richard. I'm glad you're enjoying it so far, and we're really grateful for anyone who wants to order a copy. It's on Amazon. It's on Waterstones. You can get the e-reader. You can get it dispatched around the world. You might have to do some black magic with Amazon to change your address to get it sent to wherever you are in the world. But it's available. I'm hoping to get back to the UK sometime next year to do I guess to talk to whoever will talk to me, really, and once finances and time allow. But really grateful for anyone who wants to, jump into this and have a read. And of course, if they enjoy it, and even if they don't, leave a glowing review, 5-star review on online. That really helps. We're in the age of the algorithm these days, sadly. But thanks so much for having me, Richard. I've really enjoyed putting a face to the name and having a chat. So hope to catch up in person at some point.
Well, one day our paths will chat. Most likely, probably in the UK, just by chance. I don't know when I'm next going to Paraguay. Children and life preclude too much travel. But I was going to say quickly, it is a great book, and I do recommend it. And I think you're going to be absolutely fine with it. It's no small undertaking to have traveled all of those distances and collected the stories, and to then put it down on paper. Anyone can throw a backpack on, but to actually put it down and make it coherent is very exciting. And I will read it, and I again recommend everyone to read it. And we'll put the links up on all social media and so on. There are no mentions of cocaine hippos, I don't think, in there. So
not a single hippo was harmed or even mentioned in the making of this book.
You will be banned. Have they afforded Paraguayan citizenship for you yet?
It's in the works. Yeah, bureaucracy here is very, very slow unless you're willing to grease the right palms, and as a matter of principle, I don't. And also finances, I don't go in for palm greasing. So we're working it through at the moment. But yeah, who knows? I think the current governing party, if they happen to read the book, they are unlikely to award me honorary citizenship, put it that way, because I kind of give it to them with both barrels a little bit, as I think it is incumbent upon any journalist who's independent minded, and they come and see the situation here. But who knows? Maybe if if the leftists, if the pink tide 0.2 or 0.3 somehow breaks over Paraguay, maybe they'll be a bit more generous. But yeah, no, I'm here for the foreseeable, and yeah, really, yeah, and definitely recommend your listeners come check out what we're doing on the Paraguay Post. We're starting small, but the idea is to really keep bringing cool stories from here and working with Paraguayan journalists to sort of break that amnesia that we talked about at the start. Break that sort of that sort of, they call it a circle mediatical, the media siege, the media blockade, and really get the news of the shore, the sad and outrageous and scandalous things that are happening here, but also the really cool and interesting and inspiring things as well.
Well, it's a great place to bring this to an end. We've been talking to Laurence Blair. It has been an absolute pleasure. Do check out the book, Patria, Lost Countries of South America. It's always it's a true honor to talk to you and hear your enthusiasm for it all. This has been episode 545 of the Columbia Calling podcast. Check out the links. He's all over social media as well. We will put them up there. But again, I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and then even slightly envious that he's done a book like that. But that's all. That's grist for the mill as well. Push us harder. But anyway, this has been a fantastic episode. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for your time. It really has been very special indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me.